Hey there! Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're gonna look at one of the most important events in world history, the French Revolution. And if you can survive the terrible puns, we will get through this together. Now, as always, your enjoyment of this video will increase greatly if you have some background knowledge of the Enlightenment. The French Revolution was a time period from 1789 to 1799 during which France went through some serious political and social upheaval. It had some causes and it had some consequences. So if you haven't already done so, go watch that video right now. And since most people in France were poor, they could not afford to buy food. And as a result, there were a lot of angry people walking around. The Third Estate demanded that they be given more voting power in the Estates General, and they argued that since they made up 97% of the population, it only made sense that they have more than just one vote in an assembly where the clergy and the nobility each had one vote. When the king refused their request, the representatives of the Third Estate walked out and formed their own kind of Congress, called the National Assembly. And just like the American Revolution, the French Revolution was not just about throwing off the chains of an oppressive government. It was also about creating a new way of governing. Oh, and by the way, if you're enjoying this video and you want me to keep making them, the way that you can let me know that is by subscribing and by giving me some stars. Both of those things are totally free, and it really helps us out. Thanks. Soon, the whole continent was being swept up in revolutionary fervor. And in Latin America, the Spanish and Portuguese colonies heard about the French and American revolutions and decided that they wanted to overthrow their European oppressors as well. Before the revolution, most Europeans thought that the king was ordained by God and that his power was absolute. If you want me to keep making them, the way that you can let me know that is by subscribing and by giving me some stars. Both of those things are totally free, and it really helps us out. I'm out. But the revolution proved that it was possible to overthrow an oppressive government and establish a republic. And that meant that other groups who were living under oppressive governments had hope that they could do the same thing. The revolutionaries wanted to create a republic in France, which is a form of government in which the people elect leaders to represent them, and they declared themselves to be the true representatives of the French people. You might remember from the last video that the Enlightenment thinkers believed in the power of the people. As the French Revolution got underway, the revolutionaries executed the king and established a republic. But after a while, they got tired of having elected leaders who represented them because those leaders weren't doing what they wanted. As the French Revolution spread the idea that people are naturally free and equal, it inspired people all over Europe to think about what it meant to be French or German or Italian. And they began to identify with their cultures and their countries in a new way. Secondly, the French Revolution helped to weaken the power of the Catholic Church. Remember, the French clergy had been part of the First Estate, and they had a lot of political power because of the support of the king. But as the revolution got underway and the king lost power, the clergy lost their privileged status in French society, and they never regained it. In fact, this was true all over Europe. As the old monarchies were overthrown and replaced with republics, the Catholic Church lost a lot of its influence. And so France went through a period of chaos and violence. And eventually, a man named Napoleon seized power and established an empire. And so these starving, angry people started reading Enlightenment texts and having discussions about how the government ought to work and what rights they had as citizens. And they began to believe that their government, which had failed to keep them alive, did not deserve their loyalty. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any more of our videos. It'll only take you like 8 minutes. He was also afraid to make changes because that might anger the first two estates, the people who had always benefited from the way things were. And so the French people decided to take matters into their own hands. The people of Paris stormed this famous prison and killed the guards. And it was a clear sign that the revolution was underway. See, France had been involved in a bunch of wars in the late 1700s, and those were expensive. Not to mention that the French monarchy had a bad habit of spending more money than they had. Just like me in college. But unlike me in college, Louis XVI was not able to pick up extra shifts at Starbucks to pay off his debt. Nope, he tried to solve his financial crisis by raising taxes. But the French people were already heavily taxed, and when the king raised taxes even more, they got pretty upset. That would be like if right now, and I don't know how much you guys spend on Netflix, but let's say you spend $20 a month on Netflix. And then the government came along and said, hey, that's a great deal you got there, but we're gonna need like half of it or something. Yeah, you'd be pretty upset too. Okay, let's get started. See, in pre-revolutionary France, there were 3 different estates or social classes. The first estate was made up of the clergy, and they didn't pay any taxes at all. In other words, the Catholic Church in France was filthy rich. But they didn't pitch in anything for the good of the country. The second estate was made up of the nobility, and they paid very little in taxes. Think of the British monarchy and how they used to live way back in Unit 3. The third estate, on the other hand, had to pay the majority of the taxes. And this group made up 97% of the population of France. So you can see why the French people were pretty upset with their government. It was also that the tax system was totally unfair. Let's start with the causes. First of all, France was broke, like totally flat out of cash. But it wasn't just the fact that people were being taxed so much. Things became even worse in France in the years leading up to the revolution because of the economic crisis. Food prices rose dramatically. Meanwhile, Louis XVI was totally clueless about all of this and refused to listen to anyone who suggested that perhaps he ought to treat his people a little bit better. In 1789, representatives from the Third Estate met in a place called the Estates General, which was kind of like a congress where all the representatives from the 3 estates met to discuss issues like taxation. Now, let's see where it went. And then the storming of the Bastille happened, which was kind of like the Boston Tea Party in that it was a symbolic attack on royal authority. Now, during the Revolution, the revolutionaries wrote a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which was very similar to the American Declaration of Independence. Okay, so that's what led up to the Revolution. Okay, let's get back to it. However, the revolutionaries had spread their ideas about liberty and equality throughout Europe, and seeds of revolution were planted in many countries. The French Revolution had some major consequences. First of all, it led to the rise of nationalism, which is a devotion to the interests and culture of a particular country. And finally, the French Revolution had an impact on how people thought about government. So that was the French Revolution. And I really hope that you enjoyed this video.